When fate delivers a desperate widow with ice blue eyes to your doorstep during the worst blizzard in decades, you'd think it's just coincidence. But what happens when you discover she's connected to the wife you lost 4 years ago will leave you speechless. This is a story about love that transcends death, family bonds that survive the impossible, and promises that take a lifetime to fulfill. Hit that like button if you believe in divine intervention, because what unfolds at Copper Ridge Ranch will restore your faith in second chances and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. She has my dead wife's eyes. Widowed rancher saves family in blizzard. Truth changes everything. The letter arrived on the anniversary of death itself. Ethan Blackwood stood in the study of Copper Ridge Ranch holding the envelope his foreman Carlos had discovered hidden behind a loose board in the bedroom closet. The letter was written in Evangeline's steady hand, though he could see places where tears had smudged the ink. My dearest Ethan, if you are reading this, then I am at peace and it is time for you to find yours. I know you, my stubborn cowboy. You will try to honor my memory by closing your heart to love. But I have seen something in my dreams, a vision that brings me comfort even as death approaches. Watch for a woman with eyes like the deep ocean, Ethan. She will come when winter claims the land, when you believe hope itself has frozen in your chest. She will bring children's laughter back to these halls, and she will carry a piece of our love story that isn't finished yet. Trust her. Protect her. Love her. Not as my replacement, but as the answer to prayers I whispered in my final hours. Some connections transcend death, my darling, and some gifts take years to deliver. The woman with sea blue eyes holds the key to your future. When she arrives, remember that love doesn't divide, it multiplies. Until we meet again, your devoted Evangeline P.S. When you find her, look for the music box in our bedroom. The melody will tell you everything you need to know. Ethan read the letter 3 times, his logical mind struggling to accept what seemed like the fevered imagination of someone facing mortality. A woman with ocean blue eyes. Coming in the worst winter storm in memory, Evangeline had always been practical, grounded in reality, even as consumption slowly stole her strength. Yet here was this impossible prophecy written with the certainty of someone who'd glimpsed beyond the veil. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke through his reverie. Carlos burst through the study door without his usual courtesy of knocking, his weathered face etched with urgency and something approaching fear. "Patron," Carlos said, breathing hard from his ride. "There's smoke rising from the old Henderson cabin down in Eagles Hollow. Someone's there, and if they stay put when this storm hits." Ethan felt his blood turn cold. The Henderson place had been abandoned for 2 years after the family moved back east, following a series of crop failures. The cabin was barely standing on its best day. Rotted timbers, gaps in the chinking a roof that leaked in spring rains. In a Montana blizzard, it would become a death trap. "How many?" Ethan asked, already reaching for his heavy coat and checking the loads in his Colt. "Can't tell for sure, but I heard what sounded like children crying. Maybe a woman's voice, too." Carlos's dark eyes were grim with the knowledge of what winter could do to the unprepared. "Boss, we need to move now. Temperatures dropping fast, and the wind's already howling like banshees." As they rode toward Eagles Hollow, fighting against wind that cut like knives and snow so thick it turned the familiar landscape into an alien wasteland, Ethan couldn't shake the memory of Evangeline's words. Watch for a woman with eyes like the deep ocean. She will come when winter claims the land. Coincidence, he told himself. Nothing more than the desperate hope of a grieving widower clinging to his dead wife's fantasies. But as they approached the Henderson cabin and he heard the unmistakable sound of children's voices raised in fear and cold, Ethan Blackwood began to wonder if some promises really could reach across the boundary between life and death. The cabin looked worse than he'd remembered. Half the roof had caved in under previous snows, gaps in the walls let wind whistle through like a chorus of ghosts, and what passed for windows were covered with scraps of canvas and old blankets. Smoke rose from a makeshift chimney that looked ready to collapse at any moment. "Hello, the cabin," Ethan called out, making sure his voice carried over the wind. "Anyone hurt in there?" The voices inside went silent immediately. Then after a long moment, a woman's voice answered, careful, wary, but trying to project strength. "Go away, we're managing fine." Even through the door in the wind, something about that voice made Ethan's chest tighten. There was a quality to it, a musical cadence that seemed familiar in a way that defied explanation. Ma'am, there's a blizzard coming that'll bury this whole valley. That cabin won't survive it. You need to come with us now. I said we're fine, but the desperation underneath the defiance was clear to anyone who'd lived through Montana winters. This was the voice of someone with limited options and unlimited determination to protect what mattered most. Then Ethan heard it, a child's cough deep and rattling the sound consumption made when it settled into young lungs. His heart clenched with memories of Evangeline's final months of helplessly watching someone he loved struggle for every breath. Carlos, he said quietly, go around back and make sure they can't run. I'm going to try talking sense into her. As Carlos disappeared into the swirling snow, Ethan approached the cabin door with his hands visible and empty. Ma'am, I don't know what you're running from and I don't care. Right now there's a child in there who sounds very sick and this storm is going to kill anyone caught in the open. I'm Ethan Blackwood from Copper Ridge Ranch. I'm offering you shelter, no questions asked. Silence. Then the sound of urgent whispering. A woman's voice and what sounded like at least two children, maybe three. When the door opened just a crack, Ethan found himself looking into the most extraordinary eyes he'd ever seen outside of his dreams. They were the color of deep ocean water, blue-green and startlingly beautiful, set in a face that might have been lovely, if not carved hollow by exhaustion and worry. The woman appeared to be in her late 20s with chestnut hair that escaped from beneath a worn shawl in waves that caught the firelight. She held herself like someone who'd learned to be ready for trouble, one hand resting on the door frame in a way that suggested she was prepared to slam it shut at the first sign of danger. But it was her eyes that held him, those impossible sea blue eyes that seemed to look straight through to his soul. Watch for a woman with eyes like the deep ocean. You're not with Victor Steele, she asked her once, barely above a whisper. Never heard of Victor Steele, Ethan said truthfully, though the name sent an instinctive chill down his spine. Right now, ma'am, I'm just a neighbor trying to keep you and your children alive through the night. Something in his voice, or perhaps the honest concern in his eyes, must have convinced her. After another moment of hesitation, she opened the door wider, revealing a scene that broke Ethan's heart. The cabin was barely habitable. Wind whistled through gaps in the walls wide enough to put a fist through, and the only heat came from a small fire burning in a makeshift stone hearth that looked ready to collapse. The floor was dirt-covered with threadbare blankets, and the smell of damp desperation hung heavy in the air. Three children huddled near the pathetic fire, and the sight of them made Ethan's throat close with emotion. A boy of perhaps 12 with defensive eyes and protective posture, clearly trying to be the man of the family. A girl around 8 with her mother's chestnut hair clutching a rag doll that had seen better years. And a tiny thing of maybe 3 who was coughing with the deep rattling sound that had drawn Ethan's immediate concern. The woman, their mother, stepped protectively between Ethan and the children. We'll be fine. The storm will pass, and, ma'am, Ethan interrupted, gently crouching down to seem less threatening. That little one sounds very sick. In this place, he gestured around the cabin where snow was already beginning to accumulate on the dirt floor. It won't survive what's coming. As if summoned by his words, the smallest child, a girl with golden curls and her mother's remarkable eyes, began coughing again. The sound was harsh and wet, and it seemed to tear something vital in her small chest with each spasm. I can't pay you, the woman whispered, her voice breaking with exhaustion and desperation. And I won't accept charity. This isn't charity, Ethan said, remembering Evangeline's practical nature, her insistence on fairness in all dealings. It's basic human decency, and if it makes you feel better, we can call it a business arrangement. My ranch could use someone who knows how to care for children and manage a household. It was a transparent excuse, and they both knew it, but it gave her a way to maintain her dignity while accepting what her children desperately needed. A business arrangement, she repeated, a small, sad smile tugging at her lips for the first time since he'd seen her. Exactly. The boy, her son, stepped forward, then his young face hard with the premature wisdom of someone who'd seen too much too young. We don't know you, mister. How do we know you're telling the truth? Ethan looked directly at the boy speaking to him with the respect one man owed another. You're right to be suspicious, son. A man should protect his family. But right now, protecting them means trusting me. The child studied Ethan's face for a long moment, taking in the steady gaze, the weathered hands that spoke of honest work, the way he'd positioned himself to block the worst of the wind from reaching the children. Finally, slowly, the boy nodded. All right, but if you hurt them, mister, I'll find a way to make you pay. The simple threat, delivered with absolute sincerity by a 12-year-old boy, should have been amusing. Instead, Ethan felt a stab of respect for the kid's fierce protectiveness and a familiar ache of loss. This was the kind of boy he and Evangeline had dreamed of raising. Brave, loyal, willing to fight for what mattered. Fair enough, Ethan said seriously. I give you my word. No harm will come to your family while you're under my protection. As they gathered their meager possessions, a few changes of clothes, some dried food, a worn Bible that had clearly been read countless times, Ethan caught the mother's arm gently. What's your name? He asked quietly. Lily, she said, not meeting his eyes. Lily Morrison. These are my children. Thomas, Emma, and Sophie. Lily. By the time they reached the ranch, all of them were half frozen and completely exhausted. Sophie's breathing had become frighteningly shallow, and Lily's lips had taken on a blue tinge that had nothing to do with the cold and everything to do with fear. Carlos, Ethan shouted as they reached the main house. Send Rodriguez for Doc Cooper now. Already done, Patron, Carlos called back, helping Thomas and Emma down from his horse. Saw you coming and sent him riding. Doc should be here within the hour, storm willing. Copper Ridge Ranch had been built to last, designed by a man who understood that in Montana territory, your home might be the only thing standing between your family and death. The main house was a sprawling log structure with wide porches, tall windows, and enough rooms to house the large family Ethan had once planned to fill it with. Now, as he ushered Lily and her children into the spacious front hall, Ethan saw it through their eyes. The polished wood floors warmed by thick rugs, the massive stone fireplace that could heat the entire ground floor, the chandelier Evangeline had insisted on having, shipped from back east. It was comfortable, well-appointed, and utterly empty of the life it had been designed to contain. Sweet Jesus, Lily breathed, her sea-blue eyes wide as she took in the grandeur around her. This is your home. For what it's worth, Ethan said, the words coming out more bitter than he'd intended. All this space, all this comfort, and for the past 4 years, he'd rattled around in it like a dried pea in a gourd. Emma, the 8-year-old, had stopped in the middle of the hall, her eyes fixed on the enormous Christmas tree that Maria Mendez had insisted on decorating despite Ethan's protests. It was covered with handmade ornaments and strings of cranberries, and in the warm light from the fireplace, it looked like something from a fairy tale. Mama, Emma whispered, her voice filled with wonder. It's like a palace. Thomas remained watchful, his eyes cataloging exits and potential weapons with the instincts of someone who'd learned to always have an escape plan ready. But even he couldn't hide his amazement at the warmth and comfort surrounding them. Maria, Ethan called. We have guests. Maria Mendez appeared from the kitchen, her weathered hands dusted with flour from the evening's baking. She was a small, sturdy woman with kind eyes and the no-nonsense manner of someone who'd raised 6 children of her own. She took one look at Lily's exhausted face and Sophie's flushed cheeks and immediately sprang into action. Ay, Dios mío, she murmured, reaching for the little girl. This pequeña is burning up with fever. Come bring her to the warm kitchen. I'll have soup ready and blankets and... The doctor's on his way, Ethan said, following Maria toward the kitchen. Carlos sent for him. The next hour passed in a blur of worried activity. Doc Cooper arrived despite the worsening storm, his lined face grim as he examined Sophie. Lily hovered nearby, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were white, while Thomas and Emma sat close together on a bench near the kitchen fire. Ethan found himself watching the family dynamics with a strange mixture of pain and wonder. The way Lily smoothed Emma's hair, while listening to the doctor's diagnosis, the way Thomas tried to look brave, while clearly terrified for his little sister, the way all of them drew strength from each other despite their circumstances. It reminded him achingly of the family he dreamed of having with Evangeline. Pneumonia, Doc Cooper announced, finally packing his instruments with practiced efficiency. But we've caught it early. With proper care, warmth, and rest, she should recover fine. The relief on Lily's face was beautiful to witness. She sagged against the kitchen wall, tears streaming down her cheeks, and for a moment Ethan had to fight the urge to put his arms around her and promise that everything would be all right. She'll need to stay warm and quiet for at least a week. The doctor continued pulling on his heavy coat as he prepared to brave the storm again. Maybe two, and these other children should be watched for symptoms. Lily's face fell as the implications hit her. A week, maybe two, trapped here with strangers while her daughter recovered. It meant accepting help, accepting charity, accepting the very dependence she'd been fighting to avoid. "You'll stay here." "Oh," Ethan said firmly, his tone brooking no argument. "All of you, until Sophie is well and the roads are passable." "I can't accept." "You can and you will." Ethan moved closer, lowering his voice so only she could hear. As Maria bustled about preparing rooms and finding clothes that might fit, as Doc Cooper gave final instructions for Sophie's care, Ethan remained in the kitchen staring into the fire and wondering what twist of fate had brought this family to his door on the very night he'd opened Evangeline's prophetic letter. Watch for a woman with eyes like the deep ocean. The sound of footsteps made him turn. Lily stood in the doorway, having changed into one of Evangeline's old dresses that Maria must have found for her. The deep blue color brought out her remarkable eyes and made her chestnut hair gleam in the firelight, and for a moment she looked so much like, not Evangeline, so. Lily was entirely her own person with her own strength and beauty and grace, but there was something familiar about her, something that tugged at the edges of his memory like a half-remembered melody. "The children are settled," Lily said quietly, her voice careful and controlled. "Sophie's breathing is much easier already. I wanted to thank you properly." "No need," Ethan said, surprised by how rough his voice sounded. "Anyone would have done the same." Lily moved into the room, her stocking and feet silent on the stone floor. No, they wouldn't have. Most people would have ridden past a broken-down cabin and told themselves it wasn't their concern. She was probably right, but Ethan didn't want her gratitude. Gratitude implied obligation, and obligation led to connection, and connection led to the kind of pain he'd sworn never to experience again. "You should get some rest," he said, turning back to the fire. "Tomorrow we'll figure out what comes next." But Lily didn't leave. Instead, she moved closer to the fireplace, holding her hands out to the warmth. In the golden light, Ethan could see the fine bones of her wrists, the way exhaustion had carved shadows under those remarkable eyes. "Mr. Blackwood," she said softly, and something about the way she said his name made his chest tighten. "I need you to know, I'm not some helpless woman looking for a man to take care of her and her children." Ethan turned to study her face, surprised by the quiet dignity in her voice, despite everything she'd been through. "What are you then?" Lily met his gaze steadily, and in her sea-blue eyes he saw strength that had been tested by fire and refined into something unbreakable. "I'm a woman who's made difficult choices to protect her children. I've lost important things, faced terrible people, but I'm not broken, and I won't be anyone's burden or charity case." The honesty in her voice, the quiet pride despite her circumstances, hit Ethan like a blow to the chest. Here was a woman who'd just been rescued from a freezing cabin with 3 children who had nothing but the clothes on her back, and she was worried about maintaining her dignity. Evangeline used to say something similar, he found himself saying before he could stop the words. "Evangeline, my wife, she died 4 years ago." Lily's expression softened with understanding and genuine sympathy. "I'm sorry, that must have been devastating." The simple acknowledgement without platitudes or attempts to make him feel better was exactly what he needed to hear. It was. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who understood loss in ways that couldn't be explained to those who hadn't experienced it. Finally, Lily spoke again, her voice soft with old pain. "My husband died 2 years ago, accident at a logging camp." She wrapped her arms around herself, the gesture unconsciously protective. "Since then it's been difficult." "What brought you to the Henderson cabin?" Ethan asked, though he suspected the answer would be complicated and painful. Lily was quiet for so long that he thought she wouldn't answer. When she did, her voice was barely above a whisper. "We were staying in Silver Falls, but I lost my position at the dress shop when the owner decided I should be grateful for his attention. When I refused, he made sure no one else in town would hire me." Ethan felt anger rise in his chest, clean and cold. "So you left?" "With 3 children and nowhere to go, yes. I heard there were abandoned homesteads up in the hills. Thought maybe we could shelter there until I figured out our next move." Lily's laugh held no humor. "Not my wisest decision." "Lilyton." Ethan said quietly, and she looked up at the sound of her name on his lips. You and the children are welcome to stay here as long as you need. No strings, no expectations, no obligations. The offer hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and danger. Lily searched his face, and Ethan had the strange feeling she was seeing more than he wanted to reveal. Why? She asked simply. You don't know us. As Lily headed upstairs to check on her children one final time, Ethan remained by the kitchen fire, his mind churning with emotions he'd thought buried forever. For the first time in 4 years, Copper Ridge Ranch felt less like a mausoleum and more like a home. But homes, Ethan knew, were fragile things, and he'd already lost one family to forces beyond his control. The question was whether he had the courage to risk his heart again, especially when he was beginning to suspect that the danger Lily was running from might follow her through the snow. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside the walls of Copper Ridge Ranch, something new was beginning to bloom in the darkness. Tentative and fragile, but undeniably real. The first seeds of a second chance delivered by a woman with sea blue eyes who might just be the miracle Evangeline had promised from beyond the grave. Dawn broke clear and blindingly bright over a world transformed. Ethan stood at his bedroom window watching the sun turn the snowdrifts into fields of diamonds, marveling at how different everything looked in the aftermath of the storm. But it wasn't just the landscape that had changed. From somewhere below came a sound Copper Ridge Ranch hadn't heard in 4 years. The laughter of children. The unfamiliar music of it made Ethan's chest tight with an emotion he couldn't quite name. He dressed quickly and headed downstairs, following the voices to the kitchen, where he found a scene that stopped him in his tracks. Lily stood at the stove, efficiently managing what looked like enough breakfast to feed a small army, while her 3 children sat at the long wooden table that had been too big for just him for far too long. Thomas was helping Emma cut her pancakes, his movements gentle, despite the serious expression that seemed permanently etched on his young face. Baby Sophie sat in a makeshift high chair Carlos must have constructed, her fever clearly broken, chattering happily as she demolished a piece of toast with characteristic 3-year-old determination. But it was Lily who drew and held Ethan's attention, in the morning light streaming through the kitchen windows, wearing one of Evangeline's simple blue house dresses that Maria had altered to fit. She looked right, as if she belonged there, as if the kitchen had been waiting specifically for her to bring it back to life. Good morning, she said, glancing up from the stove with a smile that transformed her tired features. I hope you don't mind. I found eggs and flour, and the children were hungry. Of course not. Ethan managed his voice, coming out rougher than intended. How's Sophie? Much better. The fever broke just before dawn, and she's been chattering nonstop ever since. Lily's smile widened with relief and maternal pride. Doctor. Cooper was right. She just needed warmth and rest. Emma looked up from her breakfast syrup, decorating her chin in a way that reminded Ethan painfully of the family meals he'd once imagined having. Mr. Blackwood, is it true you have 100 horses? The 8-year-old asked, with the devastating directness only children possessed. Emma, Lily scolded, color flooding her cheeks. That's not polite. But Ethan found himself smiling, the first genuine smile to cross his face in months. Not quite 100, but close. Would you like to see them after breakfast? Once the snow settles a bit? The transformation in all 3 children was immediate and dramatic. Even Thomas's carefully maintained reserve cracked, revealing the boy beneath the premature adult responsibility. Really, Emma breathed, her eyes wide with excitement. Could we pet them? Are they friendly? Some of them are, Ethan said, his smile widening at the hope in her voice. The mares especially. They like having their necks scratched. What about riding? Thomas asked, trying to sound casual and failing completely. Could someone learn? Ethan studied the boy, noting the carefully controlled hunger in his voice, the way his hands had stilled on his fork. Never had the chance to learn. Thomas's face fell slightly. No, sir. Pa always said maybe someday, but he shrugged, the gesture encompassing loss and missed opportunities. Well, that's something we can fix, Ethan said, and watched the boy's face light up with the first uncomplicated joy he'd shown since arriving. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Ethan moved to the window and saw Carlos riding up with a man he didn't recognize. Tall, well-dressed, with the kind of careful grooming that spoke of money and power. Something about the stranger's posture, the way he sat his horse like he owned everything he surveyed, set off warning bells in Ethan's mind. Carlos appeared in the kitchen doorway, his weathered face troubled. Patron, this fellow says he's looking for a woman and 3 children. Claims they stole something valuable from his employer. And what did you tell him? That I hadn't seen anyone matching that description. But he's asking to search the property, says he has legal authority. Carlos's hand rested casually near his gun belt, and Ethan knew his foreman was ready for trouble. Ethan stepped onto the back porch, his coffee cup still in hand, projecting the image of a man without a care in the world. The stranger sat his horse with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to getting his way through intimidation and implied threats. "Morning, eh?" the man said, touching his hat brim in a gesture that mocked politeness. "Name's Garrett. I represent certain business interests in the territory, and I'm looking for a woman named Lily Morrison and her 3 children." "Lot of travelers pass through," Ethan said, mildly studying the man over his coffee cup. "What's your business with them?" "Mrs. Morrison absconded with certain property belonging to my employer. Documents of a sensitive nature along with a considerable sum in cash." Garrett's smile was thin and predatory. "We just want to recover what's ours and discuss her misunderstanding of the situation." The carefully neutral language didn't hide the threat underneath. This wasn't a man sent to negotiate or retrieve stolen property. This was someone sent to eliminate a problem permanently. "Haven't seen anyone matching that description," Ethan lied smoothly. "But if I do, where should I send word?" "That's mighty neighborly of you, Mr. Blackwood." Garrett's eyes were cold as winter stone. "My employer is Victor Steele. He has extensive business interests throughout Montana Territory, land development, mining ventures, timber rights. The kind of man who remembers his friends and his enemies." The name hit Ethan like a physical blow, though he kept his expression carefully neutral. Victor Steele was a legend in the territory, but not the good kind. Stories followed him like vultures. Homesteaders who'd lost their land to questionable legal maneuvers, business partners who died in convenient accidents, witnesses who disappeared without a trace. "I'll keep that in mind," Ethan said. Garrett studied Ethan's face, clearly looking for any sign of deception. "You know, Mr. Blackwood, it occurs to me that a man with your resources might be tempted to play the hero if he encountered a woman and children in distress. Admirable impulse, but potentially dangerous for all concerned." "Is that a threat, Mr. Garrett?" "Just a friendly observation. You see, Mrs. Morrison isn't quite the innocent victim she might appear to be. She's a dangerous woman who's already been responsible for one man's death. My employer simply wants to prevent further tragedies." The lie was smoothly delivered, but Ethan could hear the calculation behind it. This was a man skilled at turning situations to his advantage, at making victims appear to be villains. "I appreciate the warning," Ethan said, his voice carrying just enough edge to make his position clear. "But I've been dealing with dangerous folks in Montana Territory for 15 years. If your Mr. Steele has concerns about my property or my guests, he's welcome to discuss them with me directly." Garrett's pleasant mask slipped for just a moment and revealing the predator underneath. "Of course, I'll be sure to pass along your invitation. You have a good day, Mr. Blackwood." As the man rode away, Ethan remained on the porch, his mind racing through possibilities and preparations. Garrett would be back, probably with more men and a different approach. And when he came, Ethan needed to be ready. "How much trouble are we in?" Carlos asked, appearing at his elbow. "The serious kind. Double the watch tonight and make sure the boys stay armed. Anyone comes calling after dark, I want to know about it long before they reach the house." "What about the woman and her children?" "They're family now," Ethan said, surprised by the certainty in his own voice. "We protect family." Later that morning, after the immediate danger had passed and the children had been reassured that the visitor was just someone asking for directions, Ethan found Lily in the ranch's small library. She was reading to Emma and Sophie while Thomas explored the shelves with barely concealed wonder. "How many books do you have?" Thomas asked, his voice hushed with the reverence of someone who'd rarely seen more than a handful of volumes in one place. "I stopped counting at 600, Ethan admitted. "Evangeline loved to read. She said a house without books was like a body without a soul." Lily looked up sharply at that something flickering in her sea-blue eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or surprise. Evangeline said that You've heard the expression before. Lily was quiet for a long moment, her hands stilling in Sophie's hair. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft with old pain and carefully controlled emotion. I had a sister once, older than me by 6 years. She used to say the exact same thing about books. Lily's voice caught slightly. She died 4 years ago. Consumption took her just like it takes so many good people. Ethan felt his heart begin to pound, though he couldn't say exactly why. Something about the timing, about the way Lily had paused, about the familiar ache in her voice when she spoke of loss. What was her name? He asked quietly. Lily met his eyes and he saw tears gathering there like storm clouds on the horizon. Evangeline. Evangeline Morrison before she married. The world tilted on its axis. Ethan stared at Lily, his mind reeling as impossible pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. The familiar bone structure he'd noticed the first night, the way she moved her hands when she talked, the musical cadence in her voice that had seemed so achingly familiar. "You're Catherine," he said slowly, remembering now. "Evangeline's little sister Catherine. She used to read me parts of your letters." "You're him," Lily whispered, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You're the husband she wrote about constantly. Marcus, she called you, but you said, your name is Ethan. Ethan Marcus Blackwood. She always used my middle name." His voice sounded strange in his own ears, distant and hollow. "You're Catherine Morrison, but you said your name was Lily." "Catherine Lily Morrison. I've gone by Lily since—" She gestured helplessly, the motion encompassing years of separation and grief. "Since I had to disappear." Thomas looked back and forth between the adults, his 12-year-old instincts picking up on the emotional undercurrents even if he didn't understand them completely. "Mama, what's happening? Is everything all right?" Lily wiped her cheeks with shaking hands. "These are happy tears, sweetheart. This is your Uncle Ethan." The simple words hit Ethan like a physical blow to the chest. Uncle Ethan. Family. The connection he'd thought severed forever by death suddenly restored in the form of a sister-in-law he'd never met, and 3 children who carried Evangeline's blood in their veins. "She never told me your married name," Ethan began, his voice rough with emotion. "In her letters, she just called you my dear sister Catherine. And then after the consumption took hold, she was so weak. She didn't know how to tell you about the children," Lily said softly, her voice breaking with years of suppressed grief. "My husband Frank, he forbade me from mentioning them in my letters to Evangeline. He said it would only cause her pain to know about what she couldn't have." Ethan closed his eyes, the weight of lost opportunities crushing down on him. 4 years they could have been family. 4 years when they'd both been grieving Evangeline alone instead of together. 4 years when these children could have had an uncle who cherished them. After Evangeline died, Lily continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I wanted to write to you to offer condolences, to connect with someone who loved her as much as I did. But Frank said it would be inappropriate, and then Frank died, and I was just trying to survive." "And I was drowning," Ethan said, understanding now why this woman and these children had felt so familiar, so right from the moment he'd first seen them. Drowning in grief and guilt and the certainty that I'd never have a family again. Thomas had been listening with growing understanding, his young face serious as he processed the revelations. "So we really do belong here?" he asked Ethan. "We're really family, not just charity cases." "You belong here," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "All of you. This was Evangeline's home, and now it's yours too." Emma clapped her hands together with 8-year-old delight. "We have an uncle, a real uncle, with horses and books and everything." But it was Sophie's reaction that undid Ethan completely. The 3-year-old toddled over to him on unsteady legs, reached up with chubby arms, and said in her clear, sweet voice, "Up, Uncle Ethan." As he lifted the little girl who carried his beloved wife's eyes and smile, Ethan felt something break open in his chest. Not the sharp crack of fresh pain, but the gradual thaw of frozen hope. For the first time since Evangeline's death, the future looked like something more than just an endless succession of empty days. "There's something else," Lily said softly, reaching into the pocket of her dress. "Something I've carried with me for 4 years, waiting for the right time to share it." She pulled out a folded piece of paper yellowed with age and in handling. "This was in the last letter Evangeline sent me just before she—" At the end, she said to give it to you if we ever met, if fate ever brought us together. With trembling hands, Ethan unfolded the paper and recognized his wife's handwriting, though it was shakier than her usual elegant script. My beloved Marcus and my dear sister Catherine, if you are reading this together, then God has answered my final prayer. Death is taking me away from you both, but perhaps it can give you to each other. Catherine, you will find in Marcus everything I told you about in my letters. The kindness, the strength, the capacity for love that knows no boundaries. He will cherish your children as if they were his own, because that is who he is. Marcus, you will find in Catherine everything I could never give you, the family we dreamed of, the laughter of children in our home, the completion of the story we began together. She is my heart in another form, and loving her will not diminish what we shared, but fulfill it. Yet I have watched you both carry grief like stones in your hearts for too long. Promise me you will set down that burden and build something beautiful together. Some bonds transcend death, my darlings. Some promises take more than one lifetime to keep. All my love, bridging the gap between earth and heaven. Evangeline. Ethan read the letter twice, tears streaming down his face while Lily wept silently beside him. Even in death, Evangeline had been orchestrating love and healing for the people she cherished most. She knew, Lily whispered, her voice wonderstruck. Somehow she knew we'd need each other. The letter I found this morning, Ethan said, pulling Evangeline's prophecy from his vest pocket. She told me to watch for a woman with sea blue eyes. She said you would come when winter was darkest, that you would bring the family we'd always wanted. As they sat together in the warm library surrounded by Evangeline's books and the children who represented their shared future, Ethan began to understand that some gifts really did take years to deliver. Some promises really could reach across the boundary between life and death. But their moment of peace was shattered by the sound of gunfire from outside, followed by Carlos shouting orders in rapid Spanish. Victor Steele, it seemed, had grown tired of polite inquiries and legal pretenses. Get the children to the cellar, Ethan commanded, his voice sharp with authority and protective fury. Now. As Lily hustled Thomas, Emma, and Sophie toward the hidden safe room that every Montana ranch maintained for Indian raids and outlaw attacks, Ethan grabbed his rifle and prepared to defend the family Evangeline had sent him. Some promises he was learning were worth fighting for. Some gifts were worth dying to protect. And some bonds really were stronger than death itself. The attack came with the brutal efficiency of men who'd done this before. Ethan reached the main parlor windows just in time to see a dozen riders surrounding the house, their movements coordinated and military in precision. These weren't the usual collection of drifters and desperados men like Victor Steele typically employed. These were professional killers experienced in the kind of violence that left no witnesses. Carlos, Ethan shouted, taking position behind the heavy oak window frame. How many? 15, maybe 20, his foreman called back from the second floor. They've got us surrounded, Patron. Bullets shattered the window beside Ethan's head, sending glass cascading across the polished floor. From the kitchen came the sound of more gunfire, and he could hear Maria's voice raised in rapid prayer as she took cover behind the massive stone hearth. This wasn't going to be a siege. It was going to be a massacre, unless Ethan could even the odds quickly. He thought of Lily and the children hidden in the cellar below, of Thomas's serious young face, and Emma's trusting smile, of little Sophie, who'd called him Uncle Ethan with such innocent joy. The fierce protectiveness that rose in his chest was unlike anything he'd felt since Evangeline's death. Clean and cold and absolutely focused. Maria, he called, the children. Safe in the cellar, senor. But these men, they know what they're doing. They're not here to talk. As if to prove her point, a voice rang out from the yard, cultured and commanding, despite the violence surrounding it. Mr. Blackwood, I believe you have something that belongs to me. Victor Steele himself had come for Lily. Ethan risked a glance through the broken window and saw a tall, elegant man in his 50s, dressed in expensive clothes that seemed utterly out of place in the aftermath of a gun battle. Even at a distance, there was something reptilian about his pale eyes, something that spoke of intelligence without conscience, power without restraint. I have family under my roof, Ethan shouted back. That's all? Ah, but family can be complicated, can it? Steele's voice carried easily across the snow-covered yard. Sometimes we discover that our loved ones aren't quite what they seem. Mrs. Morrison, for instance. Such a devoted mother, such a tragic widow. Did she mention how her husband really died? Mr. Blackwood, the words were calculated to sow doubt, to make Ethan question everything Lily had told him. But he'd seen the truth in her sea blue eyes, had felt the genuine terror when she'd spoken Steele's name. Frank Morrison died in a logging accident, Ethan called back. Steele's laughter was like breaking glass in the cold air. Oh, my dear fellow, is that what she told you? How delightfully naive. Frank Morrison died because he couldn't mind his own business, because he thought he could expose certain irregularities in my business practices. The cable that failed so catastrophically wasn't an accident, Mr. Blackwood. It was a lesson. The casual admission of murder, delivered with such cultured indifference, made Ethan's blood run cold. This wasn't just about land or money. This was about a monster who killed anyone who threatened his empire of corruption. What do you want, Steele? Simple enough. Mrs. Morrison stole certain documents from my office safe before her unfortunate departure from Silver Falls. I want those documents back, along with her assurance that she'll never speak of things that don't concern her. And if I refuse, then this becomes very unpleasant for everyone involved. You see, Mr. Blackwood, I know all about you. Successful rancher pillar of the community, tragically widowed 4 years ago. It would be such a shame if Copper Ridge Ranch suffered the same fate as so many other properties in the territory. A terrible fire, perhaps started by outlaws. These things happen in Montana. Frontier justice can be unpredictable. The threat was clear: surrender Lily or watch everything burn. But what Steele didn't understand was that Ethan had already lost everything once. The prospect of losing it again held no power over a man who'd learned that love was worth any sacrifice. Counteroffer, Steele, Ethan called out, his voice carrying the authority that had built an empire from nothing. You and your men ride away now, and I won't kill every last one of you. How droll, but I'm afraid I must insist. The rifle shot came from the second floor, and Ethan watched one of Steele's men tumble from his horse with a strangled crinta. Carlos had always been the best marksman in 3 counties, and apparently 4 years of relative peace hadn't dulled his skills. What followed was chaos. A vicious firefight that lit up the Montana night with muzzle flashes and filled the air with smoke and death. Steele's men were professional, but they were attacking a fortress defended by people who had everything to lose. For the next hour, Ethan fought with the desperate fury of a man protecting his family. Every shot was measured, every movement calculated to keep the attackers away from the house where Lily and the children waited in terrified silence. But slowly, inevitably, the odds began to tell. Carlos took a bullet in the shoulder and had to fall back from his position. 2 of the ranch hands who'd made it to the house were down, and ammunition was running dangerously low. That's when Ethan heard it, a sound that made his blood freeze in his veins. Footsteps on the stairs leading up from the cellar. Light, careful footsteps that could only belong to one person. Thomas appeared in the parlor doorway, Carlos's spare rifle clutched in his small hands, his 12-year-old face set with determination that broke Ethan's heart. I can shoot, the boy said quietly. Pa taught me before he died. I want to help. Thomas, no. Get back to the cellar with your mother and sisters. She sent me, Thomas said, his young voice steady despite the gunfire rattling the windows. Said if you're our family now, then we protect family. Before Ethan could respond, before he could order the boy back to safety, Victor Steele's voice rang out again. Mr. Blackwood, I'm afraid my patience has reached its limit. You have 30 seconds to send Mrs. Morrison out, or we're going to introduce fire to this conversation. I doubt those lovely children will enjoy what happens next. Through the smoke and chaos, Ethan could see men with torches moving toward the outbuildings. If they set fire to the barn, if the flames spread to the house with Lily and the children trapped in the cellar, he was trapped. Surrender the woman he was beginning to love, or watch the children burn. No choice at all, really, for a man who had sworn to protect family above all else. All right, Steele, Ethan shouted. You win. I thought you might see reason. Send her out and we'll be on our way. But as Ethan turned toward the cellar stairs, ready to face the most difficult conversation of his life, Thomas caught his arm with surprising strength. Wait, the boy whispered, his eyes bright with intelligence beyond his years. Mama told me about the back passage, the one that leads to the barn. She said Uncle Carlos showed it to her yesterday. Ethan's heart leaped. The escape tunnel. He'd forgotten about the hidden passage that connected the cellar to the old barn. It had been built during the Indian Troubles, designed to allow the family to escape if the house was overrun. Can you get them out that way? Already did, Thomas said with quiet pride. They're waiting in the old barn, but Mama won't leave without you. The sound of approaching horses cut through their whispered conversation. But these weren't more of Steele's men. Ethan could hear the distinctive rhythm of a cavalry charge coming hard from the north road. That's Sheriff Bradley, Thomas said, his face lighting up with hope. Mama sent word when she went to town yesterday. She told him everything about Mr. Steele. Through the broken window, Ethan could see a column of riders approaching at full gallop, led by a figure he recognized, Sheriff Tom Bradley, with what looked like half the county behind him. The effect on Steele's assault was immediate and dramatic. Caught between the defending ranch and the approaching posse, his men found themselves in exactly the kind of crossfire that turned confident attackers into desperate survivors. "This is Sheriff Bradley," the lawman's voice carried across the gunfire. "Victor Steele, you're under arrest. Throw down your weapons." What followed was a brief but vicious battle as Steele's remaining men tried to fight their way clear. But caught in the open, outnumbered and outgunned, the outcome was inevitable. When the shooting finally stopped, 12 of Steele's men lay dead in the snow around Copper Ridge Ranch. 5 more were wounded and captured, including Garrett, who'd taken a bullet through the leg and was cursing his employer with the creativity of a man who knew he'd been abandoned. But Victor Steele himself was nowhere to be found. Sheriff Bradley dismounted near the house, his weathered face grim, as he surveyed the destruction. "Ethan, you folks all right?" "We're fine, Tom." Ethan stepped onto the porch, Thomas beside him, both of them still carrying rifles. "How did you know to come?" "Got a visit yesterday from a remarkable young woman named Lily Morrison. She brought me a satchel full of documents that make for mighty interesting reading." Bradley's eyes were sharp as he studied Ethan's face. "She didn't mention she was staying at Copper Ridge Ranch, though. Said she was concerned about putting you in danger." Before Ethan could respond, a new voice cut through the night, smooth-cultured and utterly without remorse. "Sheriff Bradley, what an unexpected pleasure." Everyone turned to see Victor Steele emerging from behind the smoking ruins of the barn, Lily held firmly in front of him with a gun pressed to her temple. Even in the midst of defeat, he carried himself like a man accustomed to winning through superior planning and utter ruthlessness. "Victor," Bradley said, his hand moving toward his weapon, "let the woman go. It's over." "I think not, Sheriff. You see, Mrs. Morrison and I have unfinished business. She has something that belongs to me, and I have something that belongs to her. Her life and the lives of those charming children she's so desperate to protect." Ethan felt the world narrow to a single point of focus, the gun pressed against Lily's head, the finger resting on the trigger, the calm certainty in Steele's pale eyes that he would pull that trigger without hesitation. "What do you want, Steele?" Ethan called out, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "Simple. I want those documents back, and I want Mrs. Morrison's promise to disappear forever. In exchange, I'll let her live long enough to say goodbye to her children." "The documents are already with the territorial authorities," Lily said, her voice strong despite her circumstances. "It's over, Victor. Everyone knows what you are now." Steele's grip tightened, and Ethan saw Lily wince as the gun barrel pressed harder against her temple. "Clever woman. But you see, without the star witness to authenticate those documents, they're just papers, and dead witnesses can't testify in courtrooms." The implication was clear. Steele intended to kill Lily whether he got the documents or not. She was the only person who could tie him to Frank Morrison's murder, and he couldn't afford to let her live. "Let her go and take me instead," Ethan said, stepping forward with his hands visible. "I'll trade my life for hers." "How noble, but I'm afraid you're not nearly as valuable as Mrs. Morrison." However, Steele's smile was like ice in moonlight. "I am feeling generous tonight. I'll make you a deal, Mr. Blackwood. Deed Copper Ridge Ranch to me, full ownership, no conditions, and I'll let the lovely widow live. She can even take her children and disappear wherever she likes." "Don't do it," Lily called out, her voice fierce with determination despite the gun at her head. "Ethan, this place was Evangeline's home. You can't let him destroy that." Steele's backhand was swift and brutal, snapping Lily's head to the side and splitting her lip. The sight of blood on her face sent rage coursing through Ethan's veins like molten metal, and he had to fight every instinct to charge forward. Such spirit, Steele observed with clinical detachment. I can see why you're fond of her, Blackwood. But sentiment won't save her life. You have 60 seconds to make your decision. As the seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness, Ethan's mind raced through possibilities, all of them bad. Steele had positioned himself well, too far from any cover for a rescue attempt, too close to Lily for any of Bradley's men to risk a shot. Then Ethan heard it, a sound so soft he almost missed it over the wind. The creak of old wood from the barn behind Steele, barely audible, but unmistakable to someone who knew every sound his ranch made. Someone was in position. 30 seconds. Blackwood, Steele called out, his voice carrying cruel satisfaction. What's it going to be? All right, Ethan said, taking another step forward and making sure Steele's attention was focused entirely on him. You win. I'll sign over the ranch. I thought you might see reason. Sheriff Bradley, I trust you'll witness the transaction. I'll witness it, Bradley said grimly, but Ethan caught the slight nod the lawman gave toward the barn. He'd heard the sound too. Excellent. Mrs. Morrison will be free to go once the paperwork is signed, and the rifle shot came from the barn's hayloft, loud as thunder in the cold night air. Ethan watched Steele jerk backward, surprise and pain flashing across his features as Thomas Morrison's bullet took him in the shoulder, spinning him around and loosening his grip on Lily. It was the chance they'd all been waiting for. Lily threw herself sideways, putting distance between herself and her captor as Ethan launched himself forward. Sheriff Bradley and his deputies moved at the same instant, converging on Steele from multiple directions. The man was smaller than Ethan, but vicious, fighting with the desperate fury of someone who knew capture meant the hangman's noose. They went down hard in the snow, rolling and struggling for control of Steele's pistol. Steele managed to get the gun partially free and brought it around toward Ethan's head, but Lily was there suddenly, her boot connecting solidly with the man's wrist and sending the weapon spinning away across the snow. That's for Frank, she said fiercely, and kicked him again, harder this time. And that's for threatening my children. Sheriff Bradley and his deputies were there, then hauling Steele to his feet and snapping iron shackles around his wrists. The man's shoulder was bleeding freely from Thomas's shot, and his face was a mask of rage and disbelief. This changes nothing, he snarled at Ethan, his cultured veneer finally cracking to reveal the animal beneath. You think this ends it? I have partners, Blackwood. Men with more money and influence than you can imagine. They won't forget this. Let them come, Ethan said quietly, helping Lily to her feet and checking her for injuries beyond the split lip. We'll be ready. As the deputies led Steele away to face territorial justice, Ethan turned to find Thomas climbing down from the barn loft, Carlos's rifle still in his hands, his young face pale but determined. That was the bravest thing I've ever seen, Ethan said, dropping to one knee in front of the boy who just saved all their lives. Your father would have been proud. Thomas's composure finally cracked and he threw himself into Ethan's arms with a sob. I was so scared I'd miss, he whispered. I was so scared I'd hurt Mama instead. But you didn't miss, Ethan said, holding the boy tight and feeling his own eyes burn with unshed tears. You saved her. You saved all of us. As the immediate crisis passed and the full scope of their survival became clear, Ethan found himself surrounded by family. Blood family and chosen family bound together by love and shared danger and the knowledge that they'd fought for each other when it mattered most. Lily stood beside him, bruised but unbroken, her sea-blue eyes bright with tears of relief and something deeper. Thomas held on to both of them with fierce possessiveness, while Emma and Sophie emerged from the barn, with Maria, their faces lighting up when they saw their mother safe. Is it over? Emma asked, her 8-year-old voice small in the vast Montana night. It's over, sweetheart, Lily said, gathering her daughter into her arms. We're safe now. We're home. Home. The word hung in the air between them, full of promise and possibility. Copper Ridge Ranch, scarred by battle but not broken, stood ready to embrace the family it had been waiting for. 2 weeks later, after the last of Victor Steele's criminal empire had been dismantled by territorial authorities, after the wounded had healed and the damage had been repaired, Ethan Blackwood stood in the small church where he'd married Evangeline 8 years before. This time, Lily Morrison walked down the aisle toward him, radiant in Evangeline's wedding dress, which Maria had carefully altered to fit. Thomas stood as Ethan's best man, proud and serious in his new responsibility, while Emma and Sophie served as flower girls, with the solemnity of children who understood the importance of the moment. As they exchanged vows, promises to love, honor, and protect each other through whatever trials might come, Ethan felt Evangeline's presence like a blessing over them all. His first wife had kept her promise, had sent him exactly the family he needed to heal his broken heart. And when they kissed to seal their union, when the small congregation erupted in applause and the children laughed with pure joy, Ethan understood that some bonds really did transcend death, and some gifts really were worth waiting a lifetime to receive. That night, as he and Lily stood together on the porch of Copper Ridge Ranch, watching the stars emerge over the Montana landscape, they would share for the rest of their lives. Ethan felt a peace he'd never expected to know again. "Do you think she approves?" Lily asked softly, following his gaze toward the portrait of Evangeline that still hung in the main parlor. "I think," Ethan said, pulling his new wife close and marveling at the rightness of it, "that she's exactly where she always wanted to be, surrounded by family in a home filled with love and laughter." From somewhere in the house came the sound of children's voices. Thomas reading a bedtime story to his sisters in the library, where Evangeline's books waited to nurture another generation of dreamers. It was the sound of promises kept, of second chances, embraced, of love that multiplied rather than divided. It was the sound of home. Thank you for joining Ethan and Lily on their journey from loneliness to love, from grief to healing. Their story reminds us that even in our darkest winters, hope can arrive in the most unexpected forms, sometimes in the shape of a woman with sea blue eyes and 3 children who need protecting. If this tale of second chances and divine timing touched your heart, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories about love conquering adversity. Share in the comments which moment moved you most. Was it Thomas's heroic shot that saved his mother, the revelation that Lily was Evangeline's sister, or Ethan's proposal after their victory over evil? Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest stories of romance, redemption, and the power of family, both blood and chosen, to heal even the deepest wounds. What story would you like to hear next? Let us know in the comments below. Until next time, remember that love really can reach across any distance, even the space between life and death, and that some promises are worth waiting a lifetime to keep.